Clara, will you stay the night? Malcolm's voice was low, rough, trembling in his chest. The fire threw their shadows high against the timber walls. She paused at the doorway, but his calloused hand closed around her waist, drawing her into the heat of his breath. His lips brushed hers, then pressed harder, making her shiver in his arms. The scent of soap in her hair mixed with smoke, filling the room with restless hunger. Cloth slipped from her shoulder. Skin met skin, tangled close as if to erase the long years of solitude. Was this a promise at last, or only one fleeting night between them? The distant howl of wolves carried through the dark ridges, tearing the prairie night apart. The rickety stage rattled down the red dust road that led into Redemption Creek, a lonely town tucked against the Rockies. Clara Johnson held the worn cloth bag tight against her chest, as if it carried the last of her life inside. In it lay only a few patched dresses, a frayed Bible, and the little money she had left, $3 silver. That was all, after near 1,000 miles from the east to here. The wheels screeched over the hard ground, flinging dust behind. The cold was sharp enough to turn her breath white in the air. Clara pulled the thin wool collar high, yet the chill still needled through to her skin. 2 days and nights on the road had left her spent, but she would not allow herself to falter. This place, Redemption Creek, was her last chance. "We're here, miss." The driver's voice came hoarse after the long haul. The stage jolted to a stop before a sagging 2-story building, its white paint peeling, a crooked sign reading hotel swaying under the dim oil lamp. The town slept, save for a few yellow glows spilling from saloons at the far end of the street. Clara stepped down, her worn leather shoes striking the thin layer of dust, stirring a faint cloud. She lifted her eyes to the dark sky. Stars scattered thin, a crescent moon hanging like a sliver of steel. A shiver ran her spine. Still, she tightened her grip on the bag's strap and drew a long breath. "Where's the Rusty Nail Saloon?" she asked softly but firm. The driver studied her, uneasy. 2 blocks south, then right. Loudest place in town. But, he scratched at his graying hair, no place for a lady. Not this hour. Clara paused, then gave a short nod. "I have no other choice." She swung the bag to her shoulder and walked. The streets lay empty but for a few drunks slumped against walls. Whistles and slurred jests followed her steps, heavy with whiskey. Clara never turned her head. Long years of enduring scorn back east had taught her one lesson. Pride was the only thing worth holding. Light spilled across the dirt, music hammering from a warped piano, guiding her to the Rusty Nail. Its rusted sign creaked in the wind, the wooden door seeping laughter, shouts, the reek of whiskey and smoke. Clara's hand brushed the crumpled paper in her coat pocket, the notice promising work at Silver Ridge Ranch. If she dared cross this threshold, her life might turn. Her dark eyes steadied. She pushed the door. The saloon hushed for a beat. Faces turned. Miners, cowhands, gamblers, sun-scarred men with sharp, suspicious stares looked upon the young black woman standing alone in the frame. The piano stumbled, then carried on, but the air had shifted. Clara stepped forward, boots creaking the planks. Her back stayed straight, chin lifted, gaze cutting through the room without a tremor. She was used to whispers behind her. She no longer let them touch her. At the bar, she set a hand on the scarred wood and nodded at the stout man with the great mustache. "I've come for the owner of Silver Ridge Ranch. I was told he's here." The barkeep arched a brow, studied her a moment, then jerked his chin toward a dark corner. "Sits alone. Black hat. That's Hayes." Clara turned. Through smoke, she found him a man, apart from the noise, leaning back in his chair, hat brim shadowing half his face. Unlike the loud card players, he said nothing. But when Clara's gaze found him, he lifted his head. Their eyes locked. Her weariness fell away. The man's ice-blue stare cut straight through her, cold and fathomless, as if testing, as if recognizing. Clara's chest tightened, strange, dangerous. She drew breath and crossed the room. The plain blue of her dress stood out against the grime and dust of the men. Step by step, she felt Hayes's gaze fixed on her, unblinking. She stopped at his table, fingers still firm on her bag strap. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was calm, yet carried an edge. The man raised a brow, tapping one finger on the rim of his glass. From beneath the black brim, his mouth curved faintly. "Sit down, Miss Johnson." Clara froze a beat. He already knew her name. She pulled out the chair, sat, holding her head high, though leaving space between them. Around them the piano clanged. Laughter rose. Smoke thickened, but between her and the man in the black hat, a quiet storm gathered. It was the meeting that would shape both their fates. Malcolm Hayes sat quiet in a peeling wooden chair, calm in a way that set him apart from the rowdy men of the saloon. The whiskey glass before him stood untouched, faint mist clinging to the rim. His blue eyes, beneath the brim of a black hat, fixed on Clara, as if he had already stripped away every defense she tried to wear. Clara gripped the strap of her bag, steadying herself. She had grown used to stares. But his was different, not contempt, not crude want, but measured, as though he weighed every part of her. "You know my name?" Clara's voice was even, without a tremor. The corner of Malcolm's mouth twitched, a shadow of a smile. "It's printed on the notice in your hand. Word rides quicker through this town than I thought." Clara laid the crumpled sheet between them. "It says you need a night hand. I've come to take it." Silence stretched. The piano clanged. Men shouted. Yet at this table, all she could hear was the hard thump of her own heart. "That job's not simple," Malcolm said at last, turning the glass in his hand. "The night at Silver Ridge isn't just mucking stalls or watching hay. You'll need a steady head, especially when a mare foals in the dark." Clara drew a breath, eyes locked on his. "I was raised on a farm in Pennsylvania. My father kept teams and breeding stock. By 12, I was helping with hard births. I can tell a false labor from the real. I can set a foal's position." For the first time his gaze shifted. Plenty have said the same, then bolted at the sight of blood. Clara tilted her head, voice lower, pride firm. "I once sat 5 hours by a mare, through every spasm until she pulled through. I don't run. If you want someone who can look death square, that's me." Malcolm's finger tapped the table. His eyes held hers, probing, testing for weakness. Clara did not break. Her shoulders stayed square, her stare unyielding. At last, he breathed out short. "Stubborn." Clara gave no answer. In places like this, silence often struck stronger than words. He leaned back, voice gravelly from long habit of few words. "Work starts tonight. $15 a week. You'll have a cabin apart from the men, small, but clean and warm." Her chest tightened. $15. More than she dared hope. Enough to live, enough to save. Yet she showed no rush of thanks. She only nodded. "I accept." Malcolm studied her, lantern light etching lines at the corner of his eyes. "No second thought? Once you step into that ranch, leaving won't be easy. Nights there are long, cold, full of risk. A young black woman, alone on strange land, people will talk." Her hand clenched the strap tighter. She leaned in, slow and steady. "People have talked about me all my life. I am used to it. All I ask is honest work. Can you give me that, Mr. Hayes?" A moment passed. Then he leaned forward, offered a rough, scarred hand. "Silver Ridge Ranch will have you, Clara Johnson." His palm was broad and firm as it closed around her small, dark hand. Heat flickered through her spine, startling her into pulling back sooner than she meant. Malcolm only nodded, as if he had seen enough. Laughter burst from the bar, breaking the moment. Clara rose, smoothing her dress, eyes still locked on him. "When do I start?" "Tonight," he said, standing. His height shadowed her. "There's a rig outside. Come on, Johnson. Silver Ridge waits." She nodded. He stepped first, and she followed, aware of the curious eyes watching them leave. A black woman walking out with Malcolm Hayes in the dead of night. Rumors would rise by dawn. She knew it well. Yet nothing mattered now but the chance in her hands. Outside, Clara breathed the sharp night air. Fear and hope mingled inside her chest. The bargain was struck more than wages. It was the first step onto a road unknown, a road where she could not see the end. But one thing was certain. From the moment their eyes met, the fate of Clara Johnson and Malcolm Hayes had bound together. The wagon rolled out of town, iron wheels grinding against the hard-packed road. The noise of the saloon, the piano, the shouts, the laughter fell behind, giving way to the wide silence of the prairie night. The moon hung high, bright enough to etch the far ridges and spill silver across the endless grassland. Clara sat beside Malcolm Hayes on the bench, both hands clasped around her worn cloth bag. The night wind slipped into her dress, carrying the scent of hay and damp earth. She had never seen a sky so open, space so vast it left her heart both quickened and unsteady. They traveled in silence. Only the steady beat of hooves and the groan of wheels filled the dark. Clara stole a glance at Malcolm. His frame was steady, his hands firm on the reins. His eyes set far ahead as if every fence line and turn of the road was already known to him. She wanted to ask about the work, about the ranch, about why he would hire a black woman when plenty of white men waited for such a place. But the words stuck. In the stillness, all she could hear was her own heartbeat, strangely quick. Half an hour later, Malcolm pointed ahead. Silver Ridge Ranch. Clara lifted her eyes. Out of the dark rose a broad timber house, lantern light glowing in the windows. Beyond it stretched stables, a granary, a cookhouse, and rows of bunkhouses. Farther still, white fences crossed the fields, where horses shifted, their shapes glinting under the moon. Her breath caught. In the middle of the wilderness, the ranch stood like an island, sturdy, ordered, alive. "It's beautiful," she whispered before she could stop herself. Malcolm said nothing. He only tilted his head slightly, a faint curl at his mouth, as though he had heard the words often yet still liked to hear them spoken. The wagon slowed and stopped before a small cabin apart from the rest, its white paint shining dim under moonlight. Curtains hung neat in the windows, a stack of wood set straight by the porch. "This will be yours," Malcolm said, tossing the reins aside and rising to his feet. Clara bit her lip, her pulse quickening. She had not yet moved when his hand reached down toward her. Instinct told her to refuse, but her legs trembled with the weariness of the long journey. She hesitated. When she placed her hand in his, the moment startled her. His grip was strong, warm. Then, almost without thought, his other hand slipped lightly around her waist to steady her down. Heat flashed through her back. Since widowhood, she had not felt a man's touch, never like this. Firm, yet not coarse. When her boots touched earth, she drew back a step, clutching her bag to cover her confusion. Malcolm gave only a brief nod, as if it were nothing more than ordinary courtesy. He opened the cabin door and let her enter first. Inside was plain but warmer than she had dared expect. A bed with clean quilts, a small wooden table with an oil lamp ready, shelves stocked with flour, salt, coffee, sugar, a narrow hearth with stacked firewood in the corner. Everything waiting, as though the master of the ranch had known she was coming. Clara set her bag down and touched the quilt. The fabric smelled new, fresh. A strange feeling rose. She had never been received with a private place of her own, prepared with such care. Malcolm set the lamp on the table. Golden light spilled across his face, carving the lines of it deeper. "There's no bath here," he said, his voice rough but even. "If you need washing, it's back at the house. Big tub, hot water kept by the hands. Not convenient, but safer." Clara nodded. Her eyes flicked to his, then away quickly. The words marked the distance between them. He, the owner, with the bright house. She, the worker with the cabin. Yet they also carried a quiet weight of respect. She would be more than a laborer. She would belong. Malcolm stepped back, resting one hand on the doorframe. "Rest. Near dawn, I'll call. Willow the mare may foal before morning." Clara gripped her dress tight, her heart still shaken by the memory of his hand at her waist. She nodded, forcing her voice steady. Yes, Mr. Hayes. For an instant their eyes caught again the moon through the door, glinting in his pale gaze. Not disdain, not curiosity. Something quieter. Recognition. He gave a short nod, then turned and closed the door behind him. His footsteps faded across the dirt. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, face in her hands. The room closed around her in silence, broken only by the wind against the porch. She wondered what she had stepped into: work, chance, or a turn of fate. And still she felt the press of his hand at her waist, a warmth that lingered long after in the shadows of her cabin at Silver Ridge Ranch. The night wind tore across the roof of the stable, carrying the smell of hay and the warm breath of horses. Clara sat on a low wooden stool, eyes fixed on the pale gold mare circling inside her stall. Willow, that was the name Malcolm had spoken. Her belly was tight, her breathing sharp, her eyes restless as they darted around. Clara set her damp palm on the rail. She had helped foal before, back on the farm in Pennsylvania. But here, in a strange land, under a stranger's eye, her nerves thrummed. One mistake could cost her the job, the only chance she had to begin again. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Malcolm stood in the doorway, tall frame casting a long shadow beneath the lantern. He didn't step in, only crossed his arms, his blue gaze fixed on her every move. His silence weighed heavier than the horse's cries. Clara forced herself to steady. She stepped inside the stall, voice low and even, words falling like balm. "Easy now, Willow. I'm here." The mare snorted, backed half a step, then stilled as Clara's hand stroked down her neck. She felt the wild heartbeat beneath the smooth coat. Squatting, Clara studied the signs, the strain, the rhythm. "Forelegs are out," she murmured, mostly to herself. Malcolm gave no reply. She brushed hair from her brow, bent to check the foal's position. The familiar feel of bone and joint steadied her breath. The foal lay right, not breech. It would take time, patience. Clara sat again, watching each contraction. With every strain of the mare, she whispered comfort, clutching the strip of cloth she had readied. Time dragged, filled only with Willow's labored breaths and the scrape of hooves in straw. At last the moment came. The small head showed, then trembling legs. Clara leaned forward, hands guiding, voice low in reassurance. With one final push, the slick body slid free into the bedding. She tore the sack, cleared the nose, a gasp. Then a thin, sharp whinny filled the air, fragile, alive. Clara sagged back onto the straw, chest heaving. She had done it. Relief broke loose in a long, shaky breath, heavy and sweet. The mare bent to her foal, licking it clean, nudging with gentle insistence to make it rise. Clara hugged her knees, eyes burning as she watched the small miracle unfold. A shift caught her. Malcolm had stepped into the stall without sound. He stood close now, pulling a white handkerchief from his pocket. Before she could react, his large hand touched her shoulder. "Look up." She obeyed, unthinking, and then with a gentleness out of place, in a man so rough he wiped the sweat from her brow. Slow strokes, careful, as though each bead of sweat mattered. Clara froze, eyes wide. No one had tended her like that, not in the long years of widowhood, not after the scorn she had endured. She wanted to turn away. She couldn't. "You did well," Malcolm said, voice low and raw, filling the narrow stall. Her throat tightened. She stared at the handkerchief, as if it held the answer to this sudden tenderness. Then, for the first time since they met, Malcolm smiled. Not the faint curl of lip she had seen before, but a true smile, one that lit the harsh lines of his face, warming even his cold eyes. Clara's breath caught. That smile stripped away his iron composure, showing something unguarded, honest, warm, almost breakable, more dangerous than contempt, more dangerous than a gun, for it tempted her to drop her own guard. The foal wobbled onto shaky legs, urged by its mother's nudge. Malcolm stepped back, giving Clara space to gather herself, yet his gaze lingered on her, as though fixing her face in memory. Clara lowered her head, whispering, "Thank you." He said nothing, only tucked the handkerchief away, and turned. He left the stall with steady strides, leaving behind the smell of straw, her pounding breath, and the ghost of a smile that she knew would haunt her long after this night. The crescent moon had barely cleared the ridges when gunfire cracked from the north pasture. Clara was checking the stables when Malcolm rode in hard shirt torn down the back, his blue eyes burning tight with strain. "Rustlers," he growled as he swung down. Blood darkened his left sleeve. Clara's breath caught, but she forced her hands steady, taking the reins from him. Crimson seeped through the cloth, heavy and wet. Malcolm clenched his jaw, hiding the pain beneath his usual iron calm, but Clara saw it clear. "You need binding," she said firmly, not asking. He gave a short nod, let her guide him into the big house. The wooden door closed, shutting them inside the glow of oil lamps. Clara rushed for clean cloth, a basin, the sharp burn of spirits. When she knelt beside him, Malcolm had stripped off his coat, bearing a thick arm scored by a torn gash. Blood ran slow but steady. "Hold still," Clara whispered. She leaned close, close enough to hear the weight of his breath. Her hands moved quick, though her chest tightened at the nearness. Malcolm's gaze tracked each motion. When the spirits bit, his teeth ground, eyes shut, sweat beaded his brow. Clara wiped it away with the corner of the cloth. Their eyes met, held long, silent, charged. "You risked your life," she murmured, voice unsteady. Malcolm answered low, rough. "Anyone would, to guard what's theirs." The words stopped her hand for a beat. Then she set the bandage firm around his arm, her fingers brushing hot skin, her heart beating faster with each touch. When the last knot was tied, Malcolm's gaze hadn't shifted. His breath warmed her hair, heavy, strange. Clara felt her palm tremble. "You are better than I expected," he said, almost a whisper. She didn't reply, only bent to gather the cloths. Yet inside she knew something had shifted. In the days that followed, Malcolm's wound drew Clara often into the big house. Each morning she changed his bandage, brewed coffee or a pot of broth. By noon she returned to her cabin. By evening she swept the dust from the study, set things in order. At first, Malcolm only watched in silence, unused to another presence in the rooms that had long echoed with emptiness. But little by little, Clara's steps filled the hollow places. When she stepped out from the small bath at the back, hair damp, the scent of soap drifting through the halls, Malcolm sometimes stood at the porch, fingers tight around an empty cup. The words pressed in his chest, "Stay," but when her eyes lifted, he only nodded, letting the words die with the lamplight. Clara felt it too. The cabin was where she laid her head, but each hour in the big house carried a strange pull, as if she were walking through a home she had never known. Malcolm's arm mended, yet the habit held. Clara came still, staying longer. Malcolm never told her to stop. His eyes, when they followed her across the room, held more than thanks. They held a quiet bond, unnamed, steady as breath. One evening, after she tied the fresh bandage, Clara sank into the chair with a sigh. Malcolm sat across, sleeves rolled, gaze locked on her. "You've borne much for me," he said. She shook her head. "I only do what must be done." He reached, lifting her chin with care, his eyes deep as if asking leave. Before she could think, his mouth brushed hers. She stilled, then answered, soft and trembling but true. The moment burned quick and warm. Then, as he drew her closer, her hand slipped, pressing into the wounded arm. Pain jolted him, a sharp hiss breaking the air. Clara gasped, stumbling back, words tumbling in apology. She fled to the stove, busying her hands with the pot, trying to smother the storm inside her chest. Behind her, she felt his eyes still on her, and when she dared glance, his mouth curved faint, a silent smile carrying more weight than words could hold. A week passed, and Malcolm's arm had healed. He no longer needed Clara to change his bandages each morning. The silence of the big house returned, emptier now without her footsteps. Only in the evenings, after tending the stables, would Clara slip in, most often to bathe, then quietly return to her cabin. Malcolm found himself waiting for those moments, sitting in his chair, listening to water pour behind the thin wall. He felt the house breathe again. And when she emerged, hair damp on her shoulders, the faint scent of soap in the air, a strange sense came over him, as if his very survival clung to that small figure. Yet within minutes, she would whisper good night, gather her things, and leave him once more in the stillness. That night, as she reached for the door, Malcolm spoke, his voice low and rough, but certain. "Clara, will you stay?" Her hand stilled on the knob. She turned, her dark eyes catching the lamplight. Malcolm rose, his words deliberate, weighted with more than longing. "Not just tonight, but for always." Clara froze. She had heard promises before most hollow, but his voice carried no vanity, no pretense. It bore the solitude of a man bound by duty, and the hunger for someone to remain. She drew a long breath, then nodded. The cabin seemed to change shape. Malcolm stepped forward, closing the door behind him. The fire snapped in the hearth, filling the room with shadows. Clara stood still, hand at her dress as if to flee, but his gaze held her there. He moved slowly, giving her space to withdraw. When only a breath separated them, he paused, voice dropping to near a whisper. "I would not bind you. I only ask the chance to be beside you." Clara looked up. His eyes, no longer stern, held a rare honesty. Something unseen drew her closer. He cupped her face with hands scarred by work, yet gentle as water. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper when she did not turn away. In his arms, every defense she had built crumbled. Fear slipped loose. Her hand clutched at his shirt, holding fast as if anchoring herself. "Clara, I have waited too long," he breathed, against her mouth. She answered with a kiss, hesitant yet certain, telling him she too was ready. The room warmed with their closeness. Firelight cracked, casting their joined shadows across the walls. Malcolm moved unhurried, each touch deliberate, carrying a message: you are cherished, you are not alone. His rough hand drifted through her damp hair, trailing to the nape of her neck. Clara's breath trembled as her body, taut with years of self-guarding, softened in his hold. For the first time in years, she let go of the world's weight. Malcolm's lips brushed her cheek, lingered at her ear. His whisper was a vow. "You will never be alone again." The words broke open a locked door within her. Tears welled, not of grief, but of release. She had lived only to endure, never daring to believe a hand could hold her this way. She lifted her face, mouth trembling against his. The kiss deepened, no longer tentative but burning with need. She wound her arms around his neck, pulling him close. Her body pressed tight, as if to erase all distance. He gathered her in, strength tempered with restraint, his hand sliding along her back, each touch searing, each caress making her shiver. They clung to each other, breath quick, lips meeting again and again, tender, fierce, unrelenting. It was not wild haste, but the long hunger of two souls who had been alone too long. Clara whispered between kisses, "I thought I would never feel this again." Malcolm silenced her with a hold tighter, his voice husky with feeling. "You deserve all of it, and more." They gave freely, trust, longing, the buried need to belong. In Malcolm's arms, Clara heard the thunder of his heart against her own. Two rhythms merging into one, like a song unspoken, yet always theirs. Outside, the world lay still, wind sliding across the roof. Inside, by the glow of fire, two worn souls found their refuge. From that night on, they knew they belonged not just for the night, but for all the days to come. Sunset spilled gold and amber across the ridges, washing Silver Ridge Ranch in a soft, warm glow. Clara closed the cabin door, her heart uneasy as she climbed the steps of the big house. For the first time since that fateful night, Malcolm had formally asked her to share supper in the home she had only entered to tend his wound. When the heavy wooden door opened, the smell of cooking drifted out rich and inviting. Inside, the room was set with unexpected care oil lamps glowing over a long table draped in white. Clara faltered for a breath, but Malcolm stood waiting. He stepped forward, dressed in a clean shirt, hair combed, looking far from the dust-worn man she first met. He touched her elbow lightly, guiding her in as though the gesture had always belonged. Another man already stood by the table, smile quick and eyes brighter than Malcolm's. "This is Jonas, my brother," Malcolm said. Jonas Hayes was near his brother's height, though leaner, his face open and easy. When he shook Clara's hand, he dipped his head with a courtesy rare in frontier towns. "So, this is Miss Clara Johnson, the one I've been hearing about for weeks," Jonas said, grin curving, his eyes sharp with meaning. Heat rushed Clara's cheeks. Jonas chuckled, while Malcolm narrowed his gaze in warning. Yet the blush on Clara's face said more than any words. The meal began in a warmth Clara had never known at Silver Ridge. Mrs. Bentley, the longtime cook, brought out beef stew, mashed potatoes, warm bread, and a golden apple pie. She offered Clara a fond smile, kind enough that no words were needed. Jonas carried the talk. He told of Denver trades, horse deals, the chatter of nearby towns. Every so often he glanced at Clara. "You know," he said, "Malcolm never wrote much of anyone before. But now every letter I get holds a line or two about the woman who takes the night watch when mare's foal. I began to think my brother was different." Clara laid her spoon down, heart racing. Malcolm remained silent, sipping wine, but under the table, his hand brushed the hem of her dress, a small touch of reassurance. "He exaggerates," Clara answered softly, though firm. "I only did what I knew," Jonas laughed. "If that's all, then why does he look at you as though no one else is in the room?" Malcolm set his glass down with a hard thud. Jonas only shrugged and carved his beef. The air eased as the meal went on. By the time Mrs. Bentley set the apple pie before them, Clara's shoulders had loosened. Jonas teased, but not with malice. His words felt more like a test, the way a younger brother measures who is worthy to stand beside his kin. In one quiet moment, Clara lifted her gaze and found Malcolm's. He gave her a rare smile, silent proof that her place here was no passing chance. "Miss Johnson," Jonas said, his tone grown serious, "Silver Ridge has never been an easy place. Folks come and go, few stay. But if you remain, I believe it could be different." Clara blinked at the sudden sincerity. She nodded once. Beside her, Malcolm set his hand on the table close, so near that his fingers brushed hers. She did not pull away. The evening closed with laughter as Jonas told of the day Malcolm had been thrown into mud by a colt, yet still tried to look proud. Clara laughed too, the sound light, surprised, as though she were not merely a guest but part of the family itself. When the time came, Malcolm walked her to the door. The night wind stirred, tossing loose strands of her hair. He brushed them back, his hand lingering. "Thank you for staying," he said, voice low. "Not only for supper, but for everything." Clara met his eyes, steady and deep, then gave a quiet nod. She stepped away, but her heart remained in that lamp-lit house where, for the first time, she had tasted belonging. Night lay still, moonlight spilling through the window slats, drawing pale bars across the porch of the big house. Clara sat in an old armchair, the cool night air brushing her face, while Malcolm leaned against a post, a worn envelope in his hand. He kept silent for a long time, as if wrestling with a part of himself rarely shown. At last he spoke, voice low and rough. "Before my mother passed, she left 2 letters, one for me, one for Jonas. She made us promise not to open them until 5 years had gone by." Clara looked up, her chest tightening at the weight in his tone. Malcolm turned the letter over in his hand, lamplight glinting on its creased folds. I opened mine this spring. She wrote that she was proud of me, but feared I was too much like my father, hard, closed off. She said a man cannot live only for land and duty. She wanted me to find someone who could stand beside me, not behind, not hidden. He paused, drawing a breath deep enough to steady himself. She wrote that if I did not know where to begin, I should open my heart to the most unexpected. And so, I placed that notice for a night hand. Clara sat stunned. Now she saw he had not only sought help with foaling mares. He had been seeking something greater. Companionship, a partner, an answer to his mother's last wish. She rose, stepped close. Her hand rested on his chest where his heartbeat pounded strong and uneven. "You've found it," she whispered, eyes glistening. "And so have I. If she wished for you to find someone to walk beside you, then I will be that one." A tear slipped down Malcolm's cheek. Clara brushed it away, her palms cupping his weathered face, pressing him into her hold as if she could keep both his grief and his hope. She bent and kissed his cheek, trembling, but sure as though sealing a vow without words. Malcolm let the letter fall, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with sudden fire. No hesitation now. No fear. Only hunger, fierce belief. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her inside while the porch door swung shut, leaving the night as witness. The fire in the hearth threw light across shelves and timbered walls, turning the room into something near sacred. Malcolm set Clara on the long wooden table. The wood groaned beneath them, but neither cared. His eyes held hers, his hands shaking as they slid the fabric from her shoulders, revealing skin gleaming bronze in the glow. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing him down, her lips finding his in burning need. She was no longer the widow guarding herself against the world's eyes. She was a woman alive in the moment, giving all her trust to the man before her. Malcolm answered with a passion he had never shown. His kiss was urgent yet tender, as if every touch must carve into memory the truth that she was the gift he had waited his whole life to claim. Outside, the prairie wind whistled across the wide land. Inside, only their breaths filled the space, hearts hammering in rhythm, two souls finding their deepest solace. That night was not like the first. If the first time had been trembling with trust, this was certainty, a fire flaring from embers long banked. Later, as Clara lay with her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she understood. The letter had not only been a mother's wish, it had been a thread that drew them together, and she had become the answer not only to his fate, but to her own. Night draped the prairie in a heavy gray, wind tearing through the fence lines, lanterns outside the stables swinging hard on their hooks. Clara pulled her cloak tighter, heart pounding at the sound that split the dark, a shrill, panicked neigh, not the ordinary cry of a restless horse. This was pain, terror. "Starlight," Malcolm said, voice clipped, face grim beneath the torchlight. He flung open the stable door and strode in. Clara followed, palms slick with sweat. Starlight, the black stallion Malcolm prized most, lay thrashing on the straw, legs striking wild, eyes rolling white. Clara needed only a glance. This would not be easy. "The foal's turned wrong," she whispered, old memories flooding back nights in Pennsylvania, a girl's hands working beside her father through grim births. But this time was different. She was not alone. Malcolm dropped to his knees, gripping the horse's mane, murmuring to calm him. "I need you," he said, eyes locking on Clara's. No hesitation. "We'll do this together." In his gaze she saw more than duty. She saw trust. Trust in her hands. Trust in the fragile love they had only begun to claim. Clara rolled her sleeves, plunged her arms into warm water from the waiting bucket. Malcolm slipped a long glove over her hand, his fingers brushing hers firm, steadying. She knelt beside Starlight, murmuring soft words, then reached to feel inside. Sweat broke along her brow. "It's breech. If I can't turn it, we'll lose them both." Malcolm held the reins tight, keeping the stallion's head from thrashing. Tell me what to do. Keep him still. Don't let him hurt himself. The rest trust me. And so they worked as one. Clara guided, careful, patient, shifting the foal inside bit by bit. Malcolm steadied Starlight, voice low, repeating calm words, his strength anchoring hers. Their eyes met through the haze of sweat and fear. No words passed. But each knew. The horse's life hung on both, and their faith in each other. Time dragged heavy. Half an hour. An hour. Starlight's cries grew sharper, his body quaking with strain. Clara's arms ached. Her resolve wavered until Malcolm's hand pressed her shoulder. Firm. Grounding. You can do this, he whispered. I believe in you. At last, Clara felt the shift. Her breath caught. Yes, it's turning. Moments later, the foal slid free, slick and trembling. Clara cleared its nose with quick strokes, hands shaking from exhaustion and awe. A thin whinny pierced the night, frail but alive. Starlight dropped his head, gasping, then reached to nuzzle his newborn. Clara's tears broke loose. Malcolm let go the reins, came to her side. His hand brushed her cheek, thumb catching the tear. You saved them, he said, voice raw. Clara shook her head, meeting his gaze. We saved them. They sank into the straw, sweat-soaked, clothes smeared with dirt and blood, yet hearts full. Malcolm leaned back against the stall wall and drew Clara into his chest. She let herself rest there, hearing his heartbeat strong, steady, tender. The lantern flame flickered, painting his sweat-lined face. Clara lifted a trembling hand, wiped the dirt from his cheek. Her fingers lingered. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips in a brief, solemn kiss. Tonight you proved more than your place here, he said. You proved we belong to each other. Clara tightened her arms around his neck, whispering, if this is our trial, then I choose to walk through every one of them with you. Outside, the wind still howled, but within them, trust had been forged, tempered by fire and fear. Starlight lay resting, his foal suckling its first milk. Clara and Malcolm sat hand in hand, silent witnesses to new life. And in that silence, they knew their love, like the foal, had been born in hardship, but because of it, it would stand stronger, unshaken, a bond wrought of sweat, tears, and faith. Autumn ripened on the hills around Redemption Creek. Maples burned gold, weeds along the road stood dry, and the air carried the scent of apples and straw. This year's harvest dance was held in the town's great barn, a gathering nearly everyone in the valley had awaited. Clara lingered on the porch, smoothing the skirt of the wine-colored dress the seamstress had hurriedly fitted for her only days before. It was plain, yet it suited her, close to her form. From inside came fiddle music, boots striking wood, and bursts of laughter. Malcolm stepped out to meet her, dressed in a dark gray suit she had never seen him wear. He stood tall, composed, his blue eyes glinting with something at once stern and tender. Clara, he said softly, extending his hand. Tonight, you walk with me. She placed her hand in his. Strong, warm fingers closed gently around hers, steadying her. As they entered, the noise hushed, heads turned. Clara felt the weight of every glance, the stir of whispers. Yet, unlike before, Malcolm did not look away. He held her hand firm, leading her through the crowd, as if her place at his side had always been certain. The band struck up, drums driving, couples spinning in rhythm. Malcolm turned to her. The first dance, will you give it to me? Clara nodded faintly. On the polished floor, he set his hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. The fiddle soared. Their steps moved as one. Clara faltered at first, but Malcolm guided her, steady, unhurried. Keep your eyes on me, he murmured. Let me carry the rest. She looked up. His gaze held hers, bright, unwavering, until the room around them fell away. The music, the stairs, all blurred to nothing but his breath at her hair and the strength of his arms. When the tune ended, he did not release her. Instead, He drew her to the center, beneath the brightest lamps. The barn stilled, as if bracing for what would come. Malcolm let her hand fall, then sank to one knee on the wooden floor. A ripple of gasps swept the room. Clara caught her breath, hand to her lips. His voice carried not loud, but clear enough for all to hear. Clara Johnson, from the night you stepped into the rusty nail, with proud eyes and a fearless heart, I knew you were unlike any other. You've stood with me through long nights in the stables, through trials that tested us both. And more than all that, you've shown me what it means to have a true partner. From his pocket he drew a plain silver ring, its face etched with a stalk of wheat. I don't want to call you only my partner, or the one I trust. I want to call you my wife. Clara, will you stand with me not just for a night, but for always? The hall fell utterly still. No whispers now, no sideways glances. The air itself held its breath. Clara looked at him, the man who had given her work, then faith, then love. Her heart surged with all she had borne and all she now held. Sorrow past, warmth present, the wide horizon of tomorrow. Yes, she whispered, trembling but sure. I will. Cheers broke like a storm, filling the barn. First a few claps, then a thunder of applause. At the back, Jonas whistled loud, grinning. About time. Malcolm rose, slipping the ring onto her finger, his hand unsteady with feeling. Then he drew her close, pressing his lips to hers. A kiss before them all. Steady, certain acclaim, and a promise both. Clara closed her eyes, giving herself wholly to the embrace. When at last he lifted his head, the hall erupted again, the band striking up a raucous tune. And in that bright, noisy barn, among clapping hands and fiddle cries, Clara knew this was no fleeting promise, but a vow sealed in the sight of all. Autumn spread across the hills of Redemption Creek. The sky stretched wide and blue, white clouds drifting slow, the air rich with the scent of ripe apples and drying hay. Each morning, as Clara rose to tend the horses, she felt a new stir in the air. Busier, brighter. Folks in town spoke of full grain bins, of barley stacked high, of a shared joy the valley had not seen in years. One evening at supper in the big house, Jonas Hayes leaned back with a cup of coffee and said suddenly, Malcolm, how long has it been since we've had a proper harvest festival? Mother used to make it the time when the whole town gathered. Seems to me it's time to bring it back. Malcolm lifted his eyes, thoughtful, but not dismissing. Clara set her spoon down, her heart quickening. A harvest festival, it would draw the whole community. It's a fine idea, Clara said softly, steady, though uncertain. Not just thanks for the fields, but for the ties we've forgotten. I could help. Jonas grinned, as if he'd been waiting on the words. Malcolm remained silent, but his deep eyes shifted to her, carrying surprise and agreement. In the days that followed, Clara threw herself into the work. The old barn, chosen for the gathering, had to be stripped of dust and cobwebs long settled. With a broom in hand, sleeves rolled high, she swept corners, scrubbed windows, clouded over with years of neglect. At first the glances of the other women were guarded. A black widow among them was no common sight. But when they saw her labor without pause, without complaint, their looks softened. Miss Johnson, hand me that cloth, an older woman called. Clara passed it, receiving a nod in return, a quiet sign of welcome. At noon, when they rested on the porch, Clara took up needle and thread, patching torn flags. Where fabric had frayed, she trimmed, stitched with care. A young girl beside her watched, wide-eyed. You sew so straight. My mama taught me, but I can't keep the line. Clara smiled, handing her the needle, guiding patiently. In the warm light, laughter rose, gentle, familiar. The festival meant food as well. Pumpkins filled baskets, corn piled high, apples gleamed in wooden crates. Clara helped lay long tables, polishing plates, setting clean cloths. When an old woman dropped a clay jug, Clara bent at once to gather the shards. It's all right, ma'am. I'll take care of it. People watched her then, and something shifted. Piece by piece, the wall between them thinned. Malcolm often stood at a distance, watching. He saw her bend with broom in hand, saw her fingers quick tying wildflowers into garlands, saw her smile bloom as she spoke with children, eager for the dance. And each time, a quiet pride swelled in him, not only that she had become part of the ranch, but that the town itself was beginning to claim her. Sometimes, she looked up, and their eyes met. Malcolm would nod, as if to say, "I see you. You're doing more than well." Clara answered with a smile, warmth flowing through her chest. As the day neared, the barn transformed. Walls whitewashed, lanterns strung along the porch, long tables laid with cornbread, roast, apple preserves. Garlands of meadow flowers breathed out the scent of the fields. Clara and the women stepped back, pride in their eyes. Jonas strode in, clapping loud. "Fine work. If Mother were here, she'd smile." Then he glanced at Clara, teasing but kind. "And my brother, he hasn't smiled this much since you showed up." Clara flushed, bending to straighten the tablecloth. But in her heart she knew Jonas spoke plain truth. Each day, Malcolm's gaze had grown gentler, his mouth softer at the edges. The night before the festival, Clara sat alone in lamplight, mending an old kerchief. Wind swept through the cracks, carrying the sweetness of harvest. She thought back to the girl who had stepped off the wagon with only a few coins. Now she was helping raise a tradition for the whole town. Not all had embraced her, not yet, but she felt it. The wall of prejudice was cracking. Smiles, nods, simple words of thanks, each was a stone laid into a new foundation. At last the night arrived. Fiddles rang, boots pounded, laughter burst through the barn. Clara stood at the open door, watching children dart between the groan. Men raise mugs, women greet one another bright with joy. Lantern light glowed across every beam. Malcolm came to her side, hand extended. "Come," he said, voice low and warm. Clara laid her hand in his, the familiar safety rushing back. As she stepped across the threshold with him, she felt no longer an outsider. Every strand of straw, every lantern, every smile bore her touch. And in the gaze of the townsfolk upon them, Clara knew her road was no longer a lonely one. That spring, the valley below Silver Ridge burst into bloom. Fresh grass rolled soft as a carpet. Wild flowers of purple, gold, and white opened beneath the gentle Sunday. At the heart of the clearing stood Malcolm's new house, the scent of cut timber still on its beams, its red roof bright against the clear sky. It was there, on the front porch, that their wedding was held. No grandeur, no finery, only an arch woven with willow branches and field blossoms, birdsong twining with the hymn of the earth. Clara wore a simple white silk dress, sewn by Mrs. Potter and the women of town. A crown of grass and flowers rested on her dark hair. She walked forward beneath the gaze of neighbors, once whispering skeptics, now smiling, nodding, offering blessing. Jonas, grinning wide, led her to Malcolm. Malcolm stood in a black suit, hair combed, blue eyes shining bright. When his hand closed around hers, the world fell silent. "I vow never to walk ahead of you, and never to leave you to walk alone," Malcolm said, his voice low but carrying. "I vow to share every sorrow and every joy, and to love you wholly until my heart no longer beats." Clara trembled, but her answer was clear. "I came west seeking freedom, but with you, I found the truest freedom. Freedom to be myself, to be loved, and to be cherished. I vow to stand beside you, never behind, never apart." When the rings were exchanged, the spring wind swept by, carrying the scent of green grass as though in blessing. And when Malcolm kissed Clara, applause rang out. Cheers, rising with the fiddle's song. 10 years passed. The house in the valley stood beneath climbing vines, its porch shaded by blossoms, children's laughter running down its paths. Silver Ridge Ranch had changed, not only larger, richer, but alive with the warmth of a family. Clara stood on the porch with a cup of tea in hand. Below, 2 children circled a newborn colt. William, 8, with his father's blue eyes, practiced riding under Malcolm's patient guidance. Beside him, Margaret, 6, dark curls tumbling, clutched her book of horse drawings, calling reminders to her brother not to pull the reins too tight. Clara laughed softly. She thought of the night she first stepped into Redemption Creek, pockets near empty, fear of being turned away heavy in her chest. She never imagined such a day, family, home, and a community that called her one of their own. Inside, Mrs. Potter now lived in a small cottage at the garden's edge, often visiting to tell harvest stories to the children. Jonas had married, a small boy of his own, still carrying his old grin. He often teased that without Clara, Malcolm would still be a sour man among horses, never knowing joy. The town, too, had changed. No longer did they meet Clara with suspicious eyes. At each harvest festival, she stood among the ranch wives, not for her skin, but for the respect she had earned in shaping Silver Ridge into more than land, into a home. One evening, as the valley glowed red with sunset, Malcolm drew Clara into his arms. 10 years, he whispered against her ear. Do you regret it? Clara leaned her head to his shoulder, watching their children run in the last golden light. Not a single day, she said. You turned a widow with nothing into a wife, a mother, a woman honored. Malcolm held her tighter. No, he answered firmly. You made yourself all of that. I only had the fortune to walk beside you. Clara smiled, fingers finding his and weaving together. Her heart stirred with memory. The first look at the rusty nail, his hand steady at her waist as he lifted her from the wagon, his rare smile in Willow's foaling night, his public vow beneath the festival lamps. All of it led here to this porch, this family, this life. As night gathered, Clara gazed out over the endless grassland and knew her journey from a woman dismissed to one chosen and cherished had never been easy. Yet because of that, the happiness now was unshakable. In the laughter of children echoing across the valley, Clara whispered to herself, At last, I have found home. And to you, who have walked roads like Clara's, share your story with us. Your words may be the light someone else needs. And if this tale has given you warmth, please press like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We long to hear your memories, your lessons, and your hopes for you, who have known many harvests of life.